Hello and welcome to this video on protecting suppliers. So in this video we're going to look at the ways in which governments may protect suppliers and employees. So how can the government protect suppliers? We have three broad answers to this question. The first is they can try and restrict the amount of monopsony power that firms have. So when we have a single buyer who can exploit suppliers, they can try and restrict that power. Secondly, the government themselves can try and buy things they need from local suppliers. And thirdly, the government can do a certain amount of tactics to try and protect domestic companies from foreign competition. So let's look at number one, restrictions on monopsony. Monopsony occurs when we have one buyer in the market. Now often the government is the monopsonist. So this is a little bit like asking the government to regulate themselves in some respects. But the government often do consult independent committees when setting wages for public sector employees. Also, the government may set minimum wages to intervene with the problem of monopsony in labour markets. When there's only one employer, to stop them offering very low wages, there might be a minimum wage. They can also use laws to prevent employees from being mistreated in other ways. And in terms of product markets, the government may use not a minimum wage but a minimum price to try and remove the buying power of customers. So for example, they might have a minimum price of milk to try and protect milk farmers from the negative effects of monopsony. So it'd be worth remembering our minimum price scheme diagram. Okay, number two, the government can source from local suppliers. So the government may direct contracts specific to local companies rather than allowing foreign firms win business with them through competitive tendering. So for example, the UK government may award British Aerospace a contract for fighter planes. This keeps the business with a local supplier. The USA government may place an order for computers with Dell. Again, this keeps the business with a local supplier. The Chinese government may source all their electronics from Huawei, which again keeps all their business with a local supplier. The third thing a government may do to try and protect local suppliers and employees is introduce what's known as protectionism, protectionist measures. And protectionism is any tactic that's designed to reduce the level of imports. This is intended to drive orders towards domestic local companies, improving their financial performance and protecting the jobs of those workers who work for those local companies. It can also help domestic companies grow and then become large transnational companies. So how might a government go about protecting domestic industries? I'm going to go through a list on the right hand side. I'd like to take down the key terms but also write a little bit about them as we go through. So the first one is a tariff, a tax on imports. So this makes imports less attractive for customers and they're more likely to buy from the domestic companies. The second one is a quota, and that's a physical limit on the amount of imports. Again, this will force domestic customers to buy from the domestic companies. Thirdly, subsidies. This may help the domestic industry to grow and to also offer better prices than the foreign imports. Some governments pass laws that require any joint ventures operating in that country to have a local partner. So if a supermarket wanted to open up a new set of stores in a country, we might specify that they have to do this through a joint venture with a local domestic supermarket, so that supermarket can gain the experience of the foreign company and also benefit financially from that. We may pass laws restricting the amount of foreign ownership of businesses. We might pass laws that state that a certain amount of the product has to come from locally sourced materials, or that a certain amount of the product has to be produced using locally sourced services. We may introduce strict environmental health and safety regulations to try and deal with the threat of imports that maybe don't quite match the same standards. So some examples. This is a recent example of the USA introducing tariffs on Chinese imports to try and protect domestic American suppliers and their jobs. This is an example here where Airbus received subsidies from the EU in order to make that business, that local business to Europe, more competitive. Here is an example in Russia where they specify that any foreign company that wants to mine or drill for oil in Russia has to partner with a local business. So here British Petroleum BP, who want to drill in Russia, have had to create a joint venture with a local Russian company called Rosneft. China is a good example of a country that has rules about foreign ownership of its businesses. Brazil is a good example of a country that has rules about the amount of local content that's required to produce a good or a service. This is an example here of the oil industry, where Brazil have regulations requiring that certain steps of the production process must involve domestic suppliers. So in this video we've looked at a number of different ways in which governments may protect suppliers and employees. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.